You could tell it was Grandma and Grandpa's house before anyone opened the door. The porch boards had the same soft creak. The screen door gave the same quick slap behind you. And once you stepped inside, the whole place seemed to run by rules that had been settled years ago and never needed to be explained. Nothing was arranged for a photograph. Nothing was trying to look vintage. It was simply a home that had been used, protected, repaired, and remembered for a very long time. That is why these houses felt so different from our own. They did not change every season. A chair stayed in one corner because that was where Grandpa read the paper. A dish stayed on the table because visitors might stop by. A room could wait all year for one holiday meal. So let's return to 12 details that made many American grandparents' homes feel almost permanent, and to the quiet habits hidden inside them. The first was the sound of arrival. Maybe it was a screen door, a heavy storm door, or a brass knocker that felt cold in your hand. Children learned to listen for it because that sound announced who had come in without anyone checking a camera or a phone. The door did more than open the house. It marked the line between the outside world and a place where time moved more slowly. The second was the candy dish. It might have been cut glass, pressed glass, or a small covered bowl that looked too fancy for everyday use. Inside were wrapped caramels, peppermints, chocolate creams, or candies that had fused slightly to their wrappers. The important part was not the brand. It was the message. Food was kept ready for company, especially in homes where dropping by without calling was still normal. A child might be told not to spoil dinner, but the dish itself seemed to say that there was always room for one small treat. That little dish usually sat in a room where nearly everything had been preserved with care. The third detail was the furniture that looked almost too protected to sit on. In some homes, especially by the middle of the 20th century, upholstered chairs and sofas wore clear plastic covers. They squeaked when you shifted your weight, felt cool in winter, and could become sticky in summer. To a child, the covers seemed uncomfortable and strange. To the adults who had saved for that furniture, they made perfect sense. A good sofa was not something to replace because the color went out of fashion. It was an investment expected to survive children, pets, visitors, and years of Sunday gatherings. The fourth detail was what rested beneath every lamp, vase, clock, and framed photograph. Crocheted doilies and small lace mats softened hard wooden surfaces and protected them from scratches or water rings. Some had been made by hand during long evenings. Others came from relatives and stayed in the family because throwing them away would have felt like throwing away the hours that made them. Their patterns might repeat from room to room, but each one carried a small record of skill, patience, and thrift. Together, the plastic covers and the doilies reveal something easy to miss. These homes were not frozen because their owners disliked change. They were stable because objects were expected to last. Protecting a table or repairing a chair was part of ordinary household management. And nowhere was that slower, more deliberate world clearer than at the telephone. The fifth detail was the phone in the hall or kitchen. It had a real place because it belonged to the house, not to one person. In many homes it sat on a narrow table with a chair nearby, a pencil, and a pad covered with names and numbers. A long-distance call could still feel important, and private conversations were difficult when the whole family could hear one side of them. Using a rotary dial required patience. You placed a finger in the correct opening, turned the dial, released it, and waited for it to return before choosing the next number. If you made a mistake near the end, you started again. That small delay changed the rhythm of calling. People often knew why they were calling before they picked up. They did not carry the conversation from room to room while doing 3 other things. They stood or sat beside the telephone until the call was finished, then returned the receiver to its cradle with a solid click. Above or beside it, there might be a handwritten list: the doctor, a neighbor, the church office, a son who lived in another state. Years later, the numbers matter less than the handwriting. One glance at those careful letters can bring back the person who wrote them. And just beyond that hallway was often a room preserved for people who were not there yet. The sixth detail was the room that waited. In some houses it was a formal dining room. In others it was a guest bedroom with a chenille bedspread, extra blankets, and drawers that were almost empty. These spaces were not used every day, but they were kept ready. The dining table opened for Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, or a large Sunday meal. The guest room waited for relatives traveling from far away. Inside the dining room stood the seventh detail, the good dishes. They might be displayed behind glass, wrapped in paper, or stacked in a cabinet where children were warned to be careful. These were not necessarily expensive by today's standards. Their value came from ceremony. Everyday meals used sturdy plates. The patterned china appeared when the family wanted an ordinary table to feel important. This could seem wasteful. Why own dishes that spent most of the year in a cabinet? But the waiting was part of their purpose. Bringing them out changed the mood of the house. Someone polished the serving pieces. Someone unfolded the tablecloth. Children noticed that the adults moved more carefully. The meal began before the food arrived because preparing the room told everyone that the day mattered. The eighth detail was less formal, but even more dependable. A tin, jar, or covered container in the kitchen that always held something. Homemade cookies, crackers, nuts, or leftover holiday candy waited for a neighbor, a grandchild, or a visitor who had not been expected. The container was often older than its contents. A bright candy tin became a cookie tin, then later a place for buttons or spare keys. Nothing useful was allowed to become useless too quickly. And that habit of saving did not stop at the kitchen door. The ninth detail was the sewing basket or repair drawer. It could contain wooden spools, bent safety pins, spare buttons, fabric scraps, shoelaces, a thimble, and needles pushed into a faded cushion. None of it looked valuable, but the basket represented a skill that modern homes use less often. A loose hem was stitched. A missing button was replaced. A torn pocket was turned inside out and repaired before the garment was worn again. Grandparents who had lived through lean years often kept small materials because they remembered when replacements cost more, stores were farther away, or money had to stretch until payday. Even families that were comfortable could carry those habits forward. Waste felt careless. Knowing how to fix something felt responsible. Children saw the result without always seeing the work. A shirt disappeared with a tear and returned neatly mended. A chair wobbled, then suddenly did not. A lamp stopped working and Grandpa opened the plug instead of throwing the lamp away. The house seemed permanent partly because someone was always performing small acts of maintenance behind the scenes. That same mixture of practicality and restraint appeared in the bathroom, where two of the strangest objects in the house could sit only a few inches apart. The 10th detail was the decorative guest soap. It might be shaped like a rose, a shell, or a tiny bar stamped with a design. It sat in a dish beside the soap people actually used. Children understood immediately that the pretty one was not to be touched, although no one could explain which guest was important enough to use it. The bar could survive years of holidays and family visits, slowly losing its scent, but never its official purpose. Beside it, behind the mirrored door, was the 11th detail, the medicine cabinet. Small bottles, ointments, bandages, combs, shaving supplies, and old prescriptions crowded narrow shelves. The cabinet was a practical archive of headaches, coughs, cuts, and treatments that had worked well enough to be kept. In an earlier household culture, people often saved containers and remedies longer than we would now. That did not always make the cabinet safe or sensible, but it did make it deeply personal. Grandma knew which bottle was for an upset stomach. Grandpa knew where the adhesive tape was hidden. The arrangement might look chaotic to everyone else, but to them it was a map. The guest soap showed the ceremonial side of the home. The medicine cabinet showed the private side. One object was preserved for appearances. The other held evidence of age, illness, and ordinary care. Then, in the evening, the family gathered around another object that organized the whole week. The 12th detail was not only the television. It was the television at a certain hour, viewed from a certain chair. In many homes, programs did not play continuously in the background. The set came on for the evening news, a variety show, a western, a ball game, or a Sunday program the family followed together. Grandpa's chair had the best angle. The lamp beside it was bright enough for reading. A small table held his glasses, the newspaper, or a cup that left the same ring night after night. This routine created a shared clock. Family members knew when to finish dishes, when to lower their voices, and when the program would begin. Children watched shows chosen by adults and absorbed more than entertainment. They noticed which jokes made Grandma laugh, which singer made Grandpa quiet, and which news story caused both of them to exchange a look. But there was one final thing that tied all 12 details together, and it was not an object at all. It was the smell of the house. Furniture polish, coffee, old paper, bath powder, cooked onions, cedar, laundry soap, and perhaps a trace of mothballs from a closet. Every room added something. The kitchen changed through the day, but the hallway and bedrooms carried a deeper scent that seemed to belong to the building itself. Smell reaches memory faster than explanation. Decades later, a similar mixture in an antique store or an older house can bring back the exact feeling of standing inside that doorway. Not a perfect picture. A physical feeling. The sense that your coat belonged on a particular hook, that the candy dish would still be full, and that someone in the next room already knew you had arrived. That is what made Grandma and Grandpa's house feel unchanged. It was not because nothing ever broke, or because the past was simpler in every way. Those homes required constant work. Plastic covers could be uncomfortable. Formal rooms wasted space. Old medicine cabinets could hold things that should have been discarded. Repairing everything took time, and household routines often depended on labor that went unnoticed. Yet the stability was real. Objects stayed because people maintained them. Traditions stayed because families repeated them. A telephone had one location. Special dishes had one purpose. A chair belonged to the person who had shaped its cushion over thousands of evenings. The house slowly became a portrait made from habits instead of paint. Modern homes are often safer, more comfortable, and easier to manage. We can replace a broken item quickly, call anyone from anywhere, and watch almost any program at any hour. But convenience has changed the way rooms collect memory. When fewer things remain in the same place for decades, fewer objects become landmarks in a family story. So think beyond the big holidays. What was the small, ordinary detail that never changed in your grandparents' house? Was it the sound of a door, a jar in the kitchen, a clock in the hallway, or the chair nobody else used? Share that one detail in the comments. And subscribe to Feel at Home, because there are many more pieces of everyday America still waiting to be remembered.